So tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, and welcome to day 2 of Connected Educator Month, launching here in New Zealand, Aotearoa for the first time, and I am delighted. You can see I'm surrounded by a surfeit of gorgeousness and riches and intelligence in the field of model learning practices, model learning environments. We've got people coming in from the UK, we've got people coming in from Hong Kong, we've even got people from Christchurch, and so we're really in for a treat this morning as we think about a whole array of different ideas in relation to modern learning environments, modern learning practices, and what that means in a world in which educators can connect more easily than they have done before. So, just a couple of things before we ease in, and then we'll also have karakia. Just a couple of housekeeping matters, and then we'll start properly. If we can all make sure that our microphones are set to mute, there will be opportunity to ask questions all the way through. But if we can just keep our microphones on mute, just as the slide is showing you there, that would be great. There is a little icon at the top of your screen with a little hand up. You can use that if you want to ask a question, make a point. So just use that anytime you like, and we'll keep an eye against name. Oops, that's it. Just keep microphones to mute there. The column down underneath us in the middle, the chat box there, do feel free to use that to raise questions, to make a comment. It would be great to hear where you're all from if you haven't shared that already in the chat down in the middle there. Just if you haven't used it before, type in the box, hit return, and then you can add to the stream of conversation. Just a note, these sessions are being recorded. They'll be archived on the Connected Educator website, and so just bear that in mind. All the key points are also being captured in a shared doc. Angela has just shared that link in the chat to the shared doc for the session, and that's also being shared out beyond this room as well. You'll be very excited to know if you presented. You can claim a digital Connected Educator badge, and Stephen will be extremely excited by that. He can add that to his long list of accolades. Equally, if you're part of this session this morning, it could go towards some of your own professional learning reflection that you're engaged with as part of your learning during the month. There'll be a quick link to the evaluation form at the end of the session, and do make sure that you stay connected with us right through the month by signing up for our newsletter. So a formal introduction, Namihi Nui Kia Koto. I'm Karen Malure-Spencer. You're not going to hear from me very much this morning, but it is my great pleasure to kick off the proceedings. I work with Core Education, and I'm the lucky girl who gets to I guess, drive Connected Educator through into New Zealand this year, connecting with Australia and the States. So it's a really exciting adventure for all of us. So let's get ourselves settled in properly this morning with a brief karakia, and then we'll get into the business proper. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa po namu te moana, he hurahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa, huie, tākie. So, I'd like to just briefly thank Microsoft, who are supporting us as part of Connected Educator Month, one of our key sponsors right throughout the month and supporting this session. And then I'd like to move straight into the business of introducing our guest this morning. And the way this session is going to work is that we're just going to invite brief commentary from the guests around the room, and in a moment I'm going to hand over to Mark, who is going to co-facilitate this session with me. But you can see in the camera and also on the slides that we have with us this morning. We'll start with the most important and the most far away, Dr. Stephen Heppel, or Professor Stephen Heppel, who is over in the UK and who has been told not to touch his computer in case he blows up the room. And be aware that we have a slight delay on the sound, so bear with us this morning as we weave a bit of magic. We also have Derek Wenmuth with us, Director of e-learning with Core Education. We have the wonderful Janelle Ricky, who works in the digital technologies, and Mauri Whanau with us in Core Education. my fabulous co-host, Mark Osborne, who's been doing a huge amount of work in this space over the last year or so, and of course myself. So haere mai, a warm welcome to all of you this morning and to our guests who have joined us as well. You're in for a real richness of discussion, and do use the chat box down at the bottom of the room to share questions and to share your comments as we go through the morning. So what I'd like to now do is hand over to Mark, Senior Consultant and Coordinator around a whole raft of work in relation to Future Focus Schools. I particularly like his statement on this slide here, that turning schools into awesome incubators. And I think you're going to be able to hear more from him this morning about the kind of work that he's doing in this space and really how it relates to this idea of educators being ubiquitously connected through digital technologies, which is one of the key focus areas for Connected Educator Month. So without further ado, and I'm looking across the desk because he's just sitting at the other computer there, and I'm going to hand over to Mark to kick us off with a few big ideas this morning and to say a kia ora himself.
Kia ora himself. Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. For those of you who don't know me, ko Mākeri Maunga, ko Kaipara Te Moana, ko Kaipara Te Awa, ko Matawaka Te Waka, ko Tauiwi Te Iwi, ko Helensville Te Kāinga, ko Osborne Te Whānau, ko Mark Taku Ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. The first job for me today, what I'm really focused on is turning this session into an awesomeness incubator. It's not going to be too hard because we've got very, very esteemed company with us, not only with Professor Stephen Heppel, but also Derek Wenmouth and Janelle Riki, as we've heard, but also everyone in the chat. And I can see the chat racing off already, which is fantastic. So get your questions in there. Use those spaces to talk around the sessions. My role in the session today is going to be very brief. I'm going to throw a few ideas around and then just get to the people who are going to do most of the talking. If you're not aware of the work that I do in this space, I work with schools on. I help people design new schools, which is really important and exciting stuff. But the really interesting work that I do comes with helping the 2,500 existing New Zealand schools look at their visions for teaching and learning and ensuring that all elements are connected and working to help to bring that vision for learning about. What I'm going to do is jump off with a couple of ideas from a guy called Tony Wagner. Now, Tony Wagner is Harvard Professor of Innovation. His job is to run an innovation unit at Harvard University, and in the connected world, looking at the modern learning practice that is required, he's identified three things that have changed rapidly over the last 10 years. And the first has really been as a result of the arrival of broadband internet, ubiquitous internet access in the developed world, and reasonably low-cost connected mobile devices. And he says that the knowledge is a commodity. It's free like water or air. No longer is it important to be a walking textbook or a walking encyclopedia. Knowing stuff is important, but his second point there is that the world cares more about what you can do with the things you know than simply knowing something. Knowing inert knowledge is no longer required. We can know a whole bunch of stuff in our heads, but very, very quickly get access to information that doesn't exist in our heads. And so the crucial challenge becomes, well, how do we do stuff with that knowledge? And that's one of the driving challenges of modern learning practice. How do we, first of all, connect learners with the information that they've got, with information that might be out there in the world, but also with how do we connect them with other people who've got that knowledge? So more collaborative, more team-based, more experiential in the knowledge that they're learning. But also, how do we connect that knowledge to problems that need solving? The big challenge in the world is solving new problems. Many of the problems that that have been solved, we're moving away from in schools. It's no longer giving kids answers to memorize. It's giving them problems to solve. So that idea of connection goes through into that as well. How do we connect that knowledge that we've got to the real world and to problems that we see in our day-to-day lives? Strengthening those critical thinking, those problem solving, those collaboration skills. And the third point that Tony Wagner makes is something that we're seeing often. Anything that's routine or automated is being offshored or is being moved towards the world of the computer or the robot. So anything that is routine that can be automated, and we think about things that have traditionally happened in schools, and there's been a lot of that, is falling away from our focus in education, and that's really what's driving modern learning practice. I want to introduce one way of thinking about modern learning, and that's to ask these questions. Why? Why learning? Why are we learning the things that we're learning? That's the driving question that should focus all of our attention. If it's simply to pass a test or to jump through a hoop, then it's probably no longer enough. If there is a driving mission that's connected to our values and our beliefs and our drive to make the world a better place, then we've got a far more appropriate basis upon which to launch an education system. But underneath, we've also got those questions, well, where should learning take place? Handed down through the ages is this idea that learning happens best inside, that it happens best sitting in rows facing the front. And increasingly, the more we know about learning, the more we know that that's not necessarily the case, certainly not for all learners and certainly not in all situations. Giving learners a bit of control over how that learning takes place, whether they're working on their own, whether they're working in groups, whether it's theoretical, whether it's applied, giving them much more agency over their learning. The what that they learn, increasingly we let learners bring themselves and bring the questions that they have about the world rather than the carefully formulated questions that teachers have prepared in order for them to demonstrate their knowledge. And the who. Traditionally, schools have done a very good job of locking themselves away from the community. We build big chain link fences to try and keep the community out. But it turns out that being very permeable and allowing the community to come in and share what they're doing in their work, and also allowing us to take what we're learning out into the community to find an authentic context is actually a really important part of the learning process. So think about those 5 questions as we go through the session today. Before I hand over to Stephen, there's one final point that I want to make where we talk about modern learning environments, and those are really important, the physical spaces, reimagining the classroom and what it might be. But in the idea, in the spirit of connectedness, we can't see building as separate from all of the other components that go into making up learning. It's about relationships, it's about culture, and it's about practice. So have a really systems thinking approach. Changing the buildings or changing the practice and not the buildings, or changing the furniture and not the buildings and not the pedagogy won't lead to much change at all. What I want to do is introduce more formally Stephen Heppel, known to many of you as a legend in the world of future-focused education, of modern learning practice, and also particularly in modern learning environments. He's been working for decades in this space and is a real visionary and a real leader. That quote down the bottom there, eyes on the horizon, feet on the ground, is a lovely way to describe the work that Stephen's done. Big picture, but also very well grounded in actually making stuff happen. So bearing in mind that there's going to be about a 5-second delay, I'm going to throw to Stephen now and just say he doesn't need much prompting. If you've heard Stephen speak, all he needs is a second or 2 gap. But I just want to say, Stephen, the idea of connectedness, modern learning practice, why is that important to you?
Well, golly gosh, and hello everyone. I'm just enjoying the chat whizzing by on the screen here. Some good stuff already, but we could start, I guess, with the importance of connectedness in policy terms. I chair a government committee here to advise our current government. This is the Education Technology Action Group, And the mission has been to look at the way we can harness technology to make learning better, to accelerate learning, to make it deeper, to make it more engaging. And of course, one of the things we've done is to try and imagine what the world of 2025 looks like. And knowing the pace of change, it'll be here by 2020. And I don't know anybody we've spoken to who doesn't imagine a more connected world of learning. At the point of entitlement, at the point of being in a debate about how much time children should spend online learning as a right. And I guess around the UK we're talking about 20% or more. But I don't want to do that because you know about all that stuff. You know that kids won't get a job if they can't work collaboratively with others online. You know that every sentence we know about better learning says that a sense of audience and rapid feedback and all those motivating things are a key part of children's learning. So I don't need to remind you about all those reasons why connected learning would be, of course, at the heart of what we're doing. I don't need to remind you that if you walk into some of our front-running schools, and there are many, you'll see the Skype bars in the back of the class and the kids walking over and casually checking the weather and doing projects with others, and the mystery Skype screens, the windows on the world that so many schools have come on live on Monday, and you have to work out before the week's over who you're Skyping with, and and the classes that are busy tweeting for their audience, you know about all that stuff. Blimey, I went into my my grandson's harvest festival over on the school I set up on the south coast over here in England, and you know a little about the school. It's a stage, not age school, mixed age, peer support. I mean, all the things you'd expect. Big, multifaceted spaces, high levels of light, low levels of CO2. And I went into their harvest festival in the church, and there's a big live screen, on the back of the church over the altar, and the 6 and 7-year-olds in the church are busy Skyping. I'm busy tweeting to God, tweeting their thanks for fruit, and their thanks for their iPads, and thanks for pretty much everything we could think of. I'm not clear whether God's on Twitter or not. I guess probably his son might be, but I know he's maybe a bit old, But I don't need to remind you of all that because you know all that. But I think the bit that's really grabbed me in the last 5 or 6 years has been the pace with which children are rebuilding their own education through their great connectivity. I'm just going to give you a little example of that. Over in West London, my daughter Juliet, who I think many of you know, you probably downloaded her free iBook on classroom design. Just search for Hepland Learning. It's free. I was her kids in Lambton School, blimey, 7 years ago, redesigned their whole classroom. They made it over. Nobody asked them what they thought. They asked them to be researchers, and they went out and did the research on light levels and colour and furniture, everything else, and produced a stunning learning environment, which, you'll know the stories. You've heard me say it often enough in conferences, but the kids broke into their classroom during the Easter holidays because the classroom they designed was so good. They didn't want to go home. They didn't want to stop for the holidays. They kept on learning. Teachers went, but the kids went in every day, registered themselves, and their results, of course, went through the roof. And then I harnessed those kids to advise my kids in Spain. These days I hold the chair in the Philip Segovia Chair in Learning Innovation in UCJC in Madrid, which is a great place to be a professor. And the kids there wanted to transform their learning spaces, and they dialed in, Skyped regularly to the kids in West London, borrowed their ideas, and actually then went over to see them. It was so good. They jumped on a cheap flight and went to see them. And they produced stunning stuff, 3-year project. And I was talking to Michael Van Utren, one of the teachers, just the other day about how the project had gone. And he took about a year really to trust learner-led innovation. And but he said, and it's on the video, I'll send you the link. But he said, he said, after 3 years, I'd honestly say now that if you're doing a project that isn't learner-led, I wouldn't even bother to start. Just not worth it. And he's come a long way in 3 years, but it doesn't stop there, because the kids in Spain, of course, are busy Skyping to my kids in Denmark over in Silkeborg, who are transforming their whole space. And so kids are in this wonderfully viral way, swapping the shoeless learning, the writable surfaces, the highlight levels. The kids in Silkeborg did an audit of all the places where they argued with their teachers. Said, let's design that out. One of the things that they argued a lot about was running in the corridors. So they painted a lane in their corridors, and I'll put the link up in a minute. You can have a look at it. But it's a green wiggly lane, and if you set foot on the green line, you have to run. So it's a compulsory running lane, and teachers and kids all have to run, and that's gone around the world like a kind of viral thing. It's wonderful. And then, of course, you start to realize that these kids aren't just swapping ideas with each other. What we've seen as they design their learning spaces and their pedagogy and their approaches to learning, what we've seen is that they've evolved the new norms. They've laid down the behaviors. They've said, when we're sitting around the big family tables, nobody argues. That's the time when you all sit and work quietly. We put the big family tables in, thinking the kids would be like a seminar, they'd all sit and chat, like the chat on the screen at the moment. But they realise if there's 12 kids sitting around the table, if you start to be a nuisance, 11 will say, oh, shut up, we're trying to work. So they've built the protocols, they've built the behaviours, they've built the whole damn thing. And in Spain, after they finished their complete makeover of their class, for which we gave them a massive €500, they were so excited at the end, because the budget was so tight, they couldn't go out and buy stuff. They had to mash up their own learning. They had to make and do. They had to learn to use a jigsaw to build the work surface. They did the painting, and they were exhilarated to have learning in their own hands. Now, of course, I find we have a huge project just starting in Spain, where we've got 2 maker spaces where the kids are all doing, Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and the kind of little kind of roboty things that are part of all our lives. Great fun. And I think I can make that wake up probably. It's gone to sleep. Oh, there it is. Look, it's flashing away. But those maker spaces we're building one in Barcelona and one in Madrid, and we're saying to the kids, how the hell does that work? How does it work when you're building a robot in one place and the kids are programming it in another? We don't know how that works. Look, you sort it out. You lay down the protocols. And when you've got it right, we'll get you to support the kids in the refugee camps in Syria and and the kids in Haiti who are still being taught in tents, and the kids in North Nigeria, where you can't go to school because some clown's going to come and kidnap all the girls. We'll find a way that the kids can help each other. Now, this is fundamentally, last point really, this is why connected learning absolutely matters. You've only got to look around the world to see a huge disconnect with youngsters. Scotland very nearly left the Union, and it was basically everybody under 35 said, we're off, we've had enough of this crap, and you've seen it tonight on the streets of Hong Kong. There's somebody in the chat room in Hong Kong. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be in Egypt next week. No, I'm in Spain next week. I'm going to be in Egypt the week after. And Egypt was transformed. These young people just said, we've had enough. But what they didn't go on to say was, we've had enough and this is what we'd like to do. So you end up with these chaotic situations where countries are in chaos, young people are disengaged, and for me it's absolutely clear that what they would like to do is learn. I turn on the television tonight, it's full of people, prime time television in Britain, and I'm sure still true enough, certainly in New Zealand, in Australia, in Canada, prime time television is learning. People learning to bake, learning to dance, learning to sing, learning to do gymnastics tonight. Learning has never been more cool. But the learning we've built is not cool. There are not programs about how exciting it is to sit in a room with 25 other people the same age, facing the same direction every Tuesday for a year. Those are not going to be compelling programs. Kids are building better learning, and they're doing it together. And to be honest, we spent most of the 80s building better learning for children. As multimedia came along, we spent most of the 90s building better learning with children, co-construction. But now, absolutely no contest. Giving children all the help we can to build better learning themselves is absolutely the future of the planet. And for us, it's exhilarating because you turn up and the kids come running over. They can't wait. I mean, my kids on Portland have just built their own sixth form centre. They've said, we want a sixth form. So there's 50 of them. They've built the place, they've equipped it, they've wallpapered it. Some of them are only doing a subject. There's only one kid studying Polish. And he said, no worries, we'll find out how we can study it. So he's studying Polish online. Why does it work so well to engage children with building better learning? Well, it's simple because in my study is full of papers on reflective practice for teachers. But of course it works with kids too. And that metacognitive engagement, that reflective practice, absolutely propels them forward in a meteoric way. But on top of that, there's a lot of them. There are 2 billion kids out there, 2 billion kids. And I think 2 billion kids have got more good ideas between them as a result of their research than 72 ministers of education. I did a conference last year speaking to 72 ministers of education, 72 countries from around the world, and I went home on the train struggling for a collective noun. 2 billion kids. The collective noun is an astonishment of kids. Our kids can do this. They're already connected. Let them go. Take down the walls, build softer edges to our curriculum, work together on building a place where they can play, and they will build, well, what they'll do is they'll mend the world we're learning. And it's as simple as that. That's why we need to focus on connectivity and children above all else. And that's pretty much it. I think that's about my time. But let's do it. Let's mend the damn world we're learning, and let's let the kids be connected. We just stand back and give them advice. We're not asking them for their opinions. We're asking them for their research, their scholarship, and their enthusiasm, and they can't wait to give it. What's not to like, eh? What's not to like?
Kia ora, Stephen. Thank you very much. It's a real privilege listening to you. I love the point you make about the kids already being connected. What we need to do is make sure that they're connected to that process of learning so that they're owning it. I really love that idea that we've spent time designing learning for learners. We've spent time designing it with them, and what we now need to do is help them to design that learning for themselves. You've sparked quite a bit of discussion around the green line running, whether learning should be fast lane or slow lane, and there's preferences expressed for both, and I think the point is that what we need to do is connect learners to either fast lane learning or slow lane learning, regardless of depending on what it is that they need. Hoping to come back to a couple of the other points that you made during the Q&A, but I'd now like to welcome Derek Wenmuth. For those of you who don't know Derek, He's Director of e-learning at CORE. Again, a long distinguished career working in modern learning practice and modern learning environments on just about every ministerial committee that's going, including the one that was prepared the report on 21st century learning in connected communities. So is a perfect guest for us to bring in today. Derek, I wonder if you'd like to talk a wee bit about connection in terms of schools being connected beyond their walls or their gates. Your microphone's muted, I think, Derek.
Kia ora, everybody. Thanks, Mark. I must have double-clicked. Stephen, just wonderful to hear you again, and always stimulated by the many thoughts you raise, and couldn't agree more that really at the heart of what we're talking about here is just releasing that dynamic potential in our kids. I popped a little quote in the chat a moment ago that I read recently, or a few years ago actually, to be honest, was saying the places where kids learn need to be places of attention, not places of detention. And that's played in my mind heaps since I read it, particularly with kids, my own kids and now my grandkids at school, who regularly in their conversations you have the sense that they're just attending school because they have to. There's the delight. I remember we talked about that many years ago, Stephen, as a critical word in all of this, is just not there. I wonder, Karen, can you whip to the slide that sort of shows three columns there? Oh yeah, this one, I guess behind this, yeah, put up all those bits. That's quite handy to have them going. There's a thinking about connection and evolution in the way that we are looking at organisations here, and I guess I'm picking up Stephen's idea of really focusing on the learning, thinking, so what, from our perspective as educators and people in charge of schools, can we do at a structural level in the same way that Stephen's done with the school that his grandkids are at? And we have to understand a little bit about the evolution of humankind, really, that we were in this area here of clans and tribes and extended family. We progressed to much more hierarchical approaches when the Industrial Revolution took over. We headed into the time of competitive markets when, particularly in New Zealand with tomorrow's schools and what we're experiencing now. But all the indications are really that we can't contain and trap and manage and organise our systems in the way that we used to, because the agency that people have and the entitlement they have in the midst of that is leading us to understanding much more cellular or networked organisations. We flick on to the next slide, somewhere there, coming. I've created what in my mind is, if we can go to the next one beyond that, I'll leave that one out. It's big up anyway, and people are familiar with that. But it really is understanding the knowledge building. This understanding, I think, the two forms of network. If we put the schools in the middle, the traditional schools, as Stephen was referring to them, where everything was organised around groups. You know, where's the delight in putting a group of 25 kids in a class and treating them all the same? Or even having a group of kids and putting them in a school and saying everything's happening here. And even within our classes, having groups. We keep pressing that down button, we'll see the descriptions. And there's an attempt at some level to understand, you know, a lot of the ways in which our current school model is organised. And if what we find is, I think there's a tension going in two ways. On the one hand, kids themselves are developing their own learning networks. They're off doing all the things that Stephen described. They're sitting, feasting themselves on YouTube, and if they're interested with Khan Academy or wherever the knowledge may come. I've got a young son at home who has taught himself how to program and is looking at a career in it, but he's done that from watching YouTube clips and connecting up with other programmers around the world, not from what he's learned at school. Keep just the next click there, Karen will show. And these things are are, as characterised here, they're very personally organised, and it's not a single entity, there's an association of entities there that are connected and focused on developing this personal knowledge and following the passions and dreams of the individuals. And of course that's what Connected Educator Month is about at a personal level for teachers, for educators, developing those connections and feeling empowered to follow our own areas. Now from a system level, we're seeing things happen at the other side. We say, okay, if we've got people operating like that, how do we reflect that as a system? And that's where thinking about schools as a network is beginning to emerge as a concept. And whilst it's very exciting to think and important to think about how we might build and structure physical learning environments, we're facing this in Christchurch, for example. You know, we're having to rebuild a whole heap of our schools here. It's been slower and so forth than ever I imagined it would be. But unfortunately, we're in a point where a lot of people's thinking is limiting themselves to thinking about rebuilding the way they used to be. Whereas we could be thinking about a wonderful network of schools in Christchurch, about sharing and collaboration, about kids able to participate and attend in one place, but maybe go up the road on the following day to another place where there's a different group of children or a group of set of resources or whatever. And then you extend that beyond to the virtual, and they may be working with kids in Hong Kong one day and kids in Ireland the next. And you can see in the way that I've just attempted to differentiate with the words below, it's not particularly exhaustive or extensive, but I think it highlights for me, as we're thinking about modern learning practice, that our traditional ways of thinking about the structure and the organisation of learning that was really bound in an age and time that's now 200 years past. We need to understand what learning is like in the life of our learners and what our structures and our organisational approaches might be in the way that a network is formed. So that's enough for me. There's heaps more that I'd love to comment on that, but I can only reinforce what Stephen said when you then take it down to the areas of passion, delight and participation of the learners. Back to you, Mark.
Kia ora. Thank you, Derek. Thank you very much. And thank you for bringing your deep, deep wisdom on networked organisation. I know that's a particular area of passion for you, and I thank you for sharing that with us today. What I want to do is introduce Janelle Riki, who's a Learning with Digital Technologies facilitator. She's also Regional Coordinator. And she's got enormous experience in culturally responsive practice, not only using digital technologies, but in terms of curriculum, pedagogy, relationships. And welcome Janelle to address us and to talk about the idea of connection in modern learning practice in a connected world with a view that is culturally responsive.
Kia ora. Kia ora tātou. I te tuatahi ka mihi nui kia koutou tēnei rā. Ko wai au, he uri au o tainui waka no whaingaroa. E noho ana au mo te wauroa ki o tautahi, ngā mihi nui ki ngā tangata no o tautahi tēnei rā. Kia ora everyone. It's really, really lovely to be here, and I have just furiously been writing on my pad and paper little notes from Stephen's wonderful kōrero, from Mark's and from Derek's, and I have to say I'm feeling a little bit like the guy that crashed the party, sitting amongst such wonderful authorities on modern learning. But I'm going to attempt to talk through some of my thinking today, and I do just want to acknowledge the huge the huge number of people in the room who will have thoughts about what I'm going to talk about, and I really do encourage you, please, to jump into the chat and leave some thoughts, and I'll attempt to talk and look at the same time. But I'm going to talk a little bit about being connected in relation to culture. And actually I'm going to skip past, that's fine, I'm going to start here if that's all right, we'll come back. And this is some new thinking that that's been mulling around in my head based on some old concepts really. And I want to talk about the culturally connected pedagogy and how that might relate to modern learning practices, to modern learning pedagogy. And I'll start with the concept of ako, which many of you in New Zealand may be aware of, but I'll try and break it down a little bit. But ako the concept of ako, it talks about teaching and learning as a reciprocal process. So teachers being learners, learners being teachers, and particularly the relationship between teaching and learning. So whilst you're teaching, you are learning. And whilst learning, often you are learning to on-teach that skill. And our kids, particularly modern day kids, seem to have started to develop this all on their own because they have become self-motivated learners. They are out there co-constructing or constructing independently their learning, like Stephen and Derek have talked about. So I think this is a fantastic model for pedagogy we can take into the class, because connected to ako is, of course, tuakana taina, and the idea behind tuakana taina meaning that you are an expert, if you like, and depending on context. So if you are a great tree climber and the learning context is tree climbing, then you would be a tuakana in that situation. And I would certainly be a taina because I am not a great tree climber. But if we were talking about baking a cake, perhaps, then in that learning context, I might be a tuakana, and someone who has never baked a cake might be a taina. And I really feel that these two concepts, ako, tuakana, taina, sit so comfortably with modern learning pedagogy because it is about agentic learners. And that leads me on to tino rangatiratanga on the right-hand side. So thinking about tino rangatiratanga in relation to self-determination. Now, back in the days of old in New Zealand's history, the translation of tino rangatiratanga in our treaty was absolute sovereignty. And in fact, it has a much, much deeper meaning for Māori. And I think a better description of tino rangatiratanga is about self-determination. And that is about learners being able to make choice. So in a classroom context, tino rangatiratanga would be about empowering learners to make decisions about what they learn and how they learn, and supporting that journey with them. And if you have a look at the picture I have on the screen there, which is, of course, the Māori flag, or tino rangatiratanga, that's the symbol here in New Zealand. And I think it is often misinterpreted, but if you look at it, to me, what it's about is about connections. And the two white quarter in the middle are meeting, and they are connecting. But more importantly, it's about connecting whilst maintaining your own identity. And that's hugely important. So the black is still black and the red is still red, and they can still connect in the middle, but keep their own identity. And I really think that we can start to look at these two in our classrooms as being culturally connected pedagogy, particularly for our Māori students. And it really lines up nicely with a lot of the things that Derek and Stephen and Mark were talking about before. Interestingly enough, I just want to touch on a point that Mark made about, history showing earlier about how there was a thought at some point in history that learning happened best inside and in rows, and that certainly was the case, particularly here in New Zealand. But that never, I do want to acknowledge that actually for Māori people that was never the case. In fact, education for Māori never happened inside, and it certainly didn't happen in rows. And the other thing is the community was certainly not locked down. It was very much a part of teaching and learning for all students for Māori. So I do think we have some lessons in the past that we could bring into the future for modern pedagogy for our Māori students, and I really encourage teachers to do that. I just want to flip over to this slide and talk about modern learning environments being culturally located spaces. And I talk to a lot of people regarding, we're looking at a redevelopment, particularly here in Christchurch, redesigning our classroom spaces. How can we make these better spaces for Māori students and for whānau? And I've started to give this lots of thought, and there is evidence of this working in New Zealand, and we only have to look at our kura kaupapa Māori, and they have spaces that allow students and whānau to learn through their culture, to learn about their culture, and spaces that would allow opportunities for children to prepare and serve kai, for example. which is food. So to be able to serve others is an extension of manaaki, or caring and respect, and it's about those key competencies and those values. And if we could make spaces in our schools that allowed students to live those cultural values, then I think we could see a real development in learning, and these kids will just run with it. I think they need spaces to be able to prepare and serve kai. I think they need spaces to be able to interact in mahi toi or Māori art. So being able to create Māori art, to be able to perform. We need spaces for our kids to be able to stand on stage and showcase their culture and showcase their talent. We also need spaces, I believe, and kura kaupapa, you know, most if not all, have spaces where kids can come together and sleep together, stay overnight. Now that is about wānanga, or learning not taking place between 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock. If we want to wānanga, we want learning to go past 3 o'clock, let's have spaces in our schools that can go past 3 o'clock. Let's create spaces for whānau to come together and stay with their children at school, to be talking, you know, and learning and sharing expertise. So I think that particularly our modern schools, and this English medium schools can absolutely do this, but start to think about how you can make your school environment culturally connected, culturally located spaces, not just for Māori students, but for all students to share in that learning and be able to practice those key competencies and those values that your school stands on. And schools have them, so allow opportunities for that to happen. Am I close to my time? Have I got time to do the last slide? Is that a nod, Mark?
Yes.
Lovely. Look, I just wanted to, this is slightly unrelated, but I just wanted to share a bit of a personal journey that I went on. So I was lucky enough to be part of the establishment staff at Clearview Primary, and those of you from Canterbury will know this is, was most recently one of Canterbury's newest schools. And so we found ourselves at the very beginning of, well, how do we start this? How do we do this? We've got these beautiful spaces, but the kids were coming from other schools, the teachers were coming from other schools, and we were trained. We were trained in the way of learning and trained in the way of teaching. So I started off with a buddy of mine and the senior team, and we just started off going, well, there's two of us and there's sort of, 60 of them nearly, or 60 something of them. So what do we do? So we decided we were going to team teach, and we looked at just realising the potential of each other. So he was really great at that high level maths, me not so much. But I was really, really great with our struggling readers. That was kind of my gift, and I could do that. So we started off with just sitting down and talking about what we felt where our strengths lie. And then we talked about getting to know our learners and realising the potential of those learners. So, sorry, these bullet points I need to reorder, but we kind of started off with team teaching and realising the potential of teachers and learning. The next thing we kind of did was we experimented with the timetable. We included something called Friday workshops. So all day on a Friday, the kids and with us would co-construct, and parents would co-construct a timetable each term for some choices. And we had some kids going out in the classroom and working in some local businesses and doing some sort of work experience stuff. We had a couple of mothers that were beauticians, and they were coming in and talking to our kids about caring for their skin and their hair, and the girls loved it. We did lots of sort of choice things for the kids on a Friday. And but I think the biggest learning for us in that first year was around the use of space. And what we found is we kind of, when the kids rocked up in term one, we kind of said, okay, set the space up how you want. And of course they set it up like a classroom. And we were going, oh no, they've just set it up how we kind of didn't want them to. But what we realised is we kind of needed to untrain the trained. And that went for us as well. We had to untrain ourselves into this is how learning happens, or this is how teaching happens. And we had to kind of break all the rules. We had to say to the kids there were no rules. And what we found when we untrained them, I guess, and took the rules away, that was what were the barriers. And our kids became more creative with their use of space as time went on, but we allowed that to be their thing. And you know, sort of by about, I think realistically it took 2 terms, but by about the end of term 2, the kids were much smarter in how they were setting up those spaces to work for them. I do just want to say quickly something else we did was, and that was from me, I think, needing to create opportunities for our kids to come together and connect, especially for our Māori students, is we set up a homemade little kitchen in the corner of one space, and the kids shared kai almost every day, and it took them a while to start to get into it, but after some time we'd have mothers coming in with pots of soup, and it became a time of connecting, of forming relationships. We had parents coming in eating kai with their kids, and these were year 7 and 8 kids. And I truly believe in the power of that. If you create opportunities for something that people have to do every day, which is eat, then they'll come together to do that, because we do want to be together during that time. So I really want to encourage English medium schools to start to look around at what we can learn from some of our Māori medium kura, and how we can integrate that into our learning spaces at school. So kia ora everyone, that's my wee bit. I'm dying to come back and read some of the comments, but thank you so much. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Janelle. Thank you very much. There's so many wonderful connections there. And the observation's been made in the chat a couple of times that this modern learning practice notion of connectedness is not that modern at all when you're looking at Māori culture, when you're looking at Pasifika culture. And just the points that you cover, the importance of wānanga, the importance of ako, of whānau, of manaakitanga, of kotahitanga, they're all about connectedness, connecting culture with learning, connecting mahitoi with learning. It's all about connectedness. And that wonderful phrase, tino rangatiratanga, links us beautifully to where we started with Stephen. What he was talking about was helping learners to build learning themselves. And so we have that message from Old Blighty, and we have tino rangatiratanga from Aotearoa. So it's a beautiful connection. We've got a couple of minutes, people, for questions. So if you've got questions, pop them into the chat for any of our presenters, or raise your hand, and Karen will field those questions. I've got just a couple of things to note. I loved your ideas of connecting arts and learning. Janelle, I've been doing quite a bit of reading at the moment around the importance of the arts, for instance, with engineering, and the examples given of look at the Pantheon in Rome and try to say that engineering, mathematics, architecture and art are completely separate disciplines, and at that point your argument falls apart. Or look at Da Vinci's Last Supper and look at what he does with things, mathematical concepts like the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio, as he works with proportion to design that painting. There is no connection, there is no separation between art, mathematics, between science and performing arts. It's all in there together. I know, Stephen, I just really want to endorse the comments that you make on and you've said this for a very long time, on the importance of the children being involved in the design of the learning spaces. There's your robot. There's a lot of the work that I'm doing around research around change leadership, and encouraging people to get on board with change, because it's a challenge for some people, emphasizes the importance of people being involved in the design and the decision-making process. So there's a strong body of research that suggests that when learners are put in that position, but also when parents, whānau, community are put in that position, it increases the likelihood that that they're going to get on board with change and they're going to own that change. There's a wonderful saying that people are more likely to buy into a story that they've helped write themselves. Any questions on any of the things that we're covering about? Angela's asked about the tertiary level. So the training for new teachers. Anybody want to make a comment on that? Derek.
Yeah, kia ora. I think the simple answer around training new teachers, I think we need to get the word training out of our vocabulary for a kick-off, and we need to take them out of the institutions and put them into the areas where the teaching is taking place and make the development of teachers a part of the overall learning experience. That's my view.
There's some of the researchers are thinking of Jane Gilbert in particular talk about the importance
maybe I can chip in on that. I've just
go, Stephen.
been trying to advise our government about what to do, and I think, yeah, no, thanks. I just think with the training of teachers, the universities we've got, you know, they don't have much in education faculties don't have much impact on the rest of the university. You know, I go into education faculties, and you know they might be talking about super classes and peer-to-peer mentoring and you know mixed age and so on. You know, but if I go next door into the business faculty or health or wherever, I don't find any of that has really stuck. So I think, you know, I think we've got to be tough with our education faculties and say if they can't change the universities they're in, train teachers. It's as simple as that. You know, if their colleagues won't trust them, why the hell should anybody else? And I think we've just got to be, you know, we've got to talk tough with them, and that's where we are.
What I was going to say before is I was talking to Professor Jane Gilbert in the last holidays, and she talked about the importance in terms of training and teacher adaptation to modern learning practice, modern learning environments, the importance of research with a big R, so formal peer-reviewed evidence-based studies that inform our practice so that we're not relying overly on hunches or word of mouth about effective practice. We're using evidence to back that up, but also research with a small r, and that's the point that Margot's made in the chat, the importance of teaching as inquiry, so that we're constantly engaging in action research into our own efficacy or our own effectiveness. One without the other is actually less effective. You can't do teaching as inquiry without relying on research with a big R, but knowing everything that there is about pedagogy, about curriculum, and not actually looking at your own practice and the changes that you're making is equally less effective. We're coming to the end of the hour. That's been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and what I have loved is all of the connections between them, because that's really emphasized and reinforced the importance of this kaupapa, really, this topic is modern learning practice in a connected world. So I want to thank all of our presenters, Professor Stephen Heppel, Derek Wenmouth, Janelle Riki, for pulling together such a compelling, connected exploration of a whole bunch of different elements of modern learning practice. There are conversations going on in the chat. Can I urge you to keep those going? Karen will give you some opportunities to carry on those chats, and I'll pass back over to her. But thank you to everyone from me for being part of this session. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. It's been really such a privilege to have heard such a range of different perspectives, and just it's actually one of I'm just cycling through those last couple of slides that Janelle had kindly put together, but actually just reminding us really that this entire conversation this morning has been about empowering. It's not really a word I like, empowering, but about ensuring that the spaces and the learning and the opportunities that we're designing within our schools, within our kura, within our kohanga, are ones that really give space for our young people to find the way forward that builds on their strengths. And the stories that Stephen has kindly shared this morning, the link to Juliet's book, that really passionate reminder to all of us about what we're in the business for. And there's going to be quite a lot of conversation really going through the month, through the next 30 days with Connected Educator Month, around teachers, educators being connected and networked. And I think what this morning has really reminded us about is why we're connecting, the purpose of it, what it is that we're trying to achieve. In fact, getting connected is really just the first step, because it's those conversations that we can have when we come together, focused on what we're trying to achieve for young people around the world. That's what's really important. And I'd like to thank everybody this morning. Stephen, I don't know whether he can hear us or whether he just made it. He just made it right to the end and then he dropped away. But in his absence, to thank Stephen, to thank Derek, to thank Janelle, Mark, all of you for being here, and also the huge number of people that have been in the room this morning, your contributions to the chat, the discussions that you have had together. Big thanks to Katrina and Angela for running the shared doc as well. I know there's been other folk in core who've also been participating in that this morning. So I'd just like to bring this session to a close, because in an hour or so we have our second session around change leadership for Māori and Pacifica education with Phoebe Davis and Tahu Paki, and I'd invite you to stick around and pop back into the room for that at 11:30. For those of you who've been with us this morning, do stay in touch. There's a huge number of amazing events online right through October, lots of reasons to connect and continue these kinds of rich conversations. Stay connected through the newsletters, as you can see on the slide there, and the tag CENZ14. We'd love you to take 30 seconds to tell us what you thought of this session. We're evolving how we run these over the month, so do let us know what you thought, and do give us the feedback. We do definitely take it on board as we go. So I love this slide. We're using this slide at the end of all of our sessions, but it's that I think the cartoon here is particularly pertinent to the kind of ideas that have been shared this morning, thinking about the purpose of being connected. So a karakia to close, everyone, and I'd like to thank you all for being here and being part of Connected Educator launch week today. Ka whakaria te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia tūruki whakataha ai, kia tūruki